Thank you all for joining us here today. I know that is a busy time of year, and I really appreciate you choosing to spend an hour with us. We're really excited to dig into special education with you for about 45 minutes. In this section, we're going to consider how FastBridge can support special education program leaders and educators to meet student needs in a more efficient and effective manner. So Bruce will share his perspective as a current special education director, and I'll share mine as a former special education director and as a former FastBridge user. We'll tackle FastBridge's use to support IEP meetings, goal setting, and progress reporting. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to share a bit about his work and thinking around this topic.
Good morning. Next slide, Sarah. The South Bay Union School District, we have about 6,800 students in grades preschool through 8th grade. Currently, we have about 1,090 students on IEPs within our district. Interestingly, our district's been an Illuminate user for kind of student general data since 2014. And then this summer, because in California, we were required to take on a social emotional screener, we signed on as a FastBridge user. What we did is in the months of June and July, staff looked at social emotional screeners, and that kind of led us to FastBridge. And it was pretty exciting for us because of our past history. Next slide. What we had prior to this summer is kind of a mix mash of things. Our special ed department was dabbling in using a progress monitoring tool that was just solely for academics, and it didn't tie into Illuminate. And we were extremely excited the fact of, okay, we've got this product that could satisfy the legislation requirement of a social emotional screener, but then, wow, we've got now an academic screener all in one. So what we did is we signed on, our board approved it in August, and then we started training our staff in September and October. So we had a very short turnaround time from finding the product to actually implementing it, which was really good for us. What we are using FastBridge for is we now have a universal screener. Prior to the summer, we did not have a universal screener for our district. We now have a single resource for rostering students. As I shared before, we kind of had our staff in special ed dabbling with a progress monitoring tool. What the staff had to do is create their own rosters and then upload that and see if it worked. Now with FastBridge, we just go straight through Illuminate, and it really has taken a lot of the anxiety away from my staff. They can just go right in, and their class rosters are automatically updated. And between assessment periods, they don't have to create new rosters, which they previously did. We have the use of Savers, which is a social emotional screener, as well as a progress monitoring tool. So we hit both the academics and the social emotional piece. So now for us, it's great. We have one place to go, and it solves all issues for us when we're monitoring not only our general ed students, but now really specifically, we can drill down to what we're doing for our students with disabilities. Next slide. And what we've done is we've taken the data that staff get from FastBridge in their progress monitoring, and we've created a cycle, what we call our IEP cycle. So whether it's an initial IEP, an annual IEP, what we do is we build in using FastBridge data to work with our present levels, which then is going to how we're working with our goals. So we're using FastBridge data to develop goals. And then in between the IEP meetings, when we report progress on goals during our reporting periods, what we do is we're now able to use data to back up the progress that we're informing parents on, whether students are making progress on their goals. So it really has become kind of this cycle for us that we can pull data, report progress on goals, and then back up our progress with the charts and data from FastBridge. Next slide.
Thanks, Bruce. So Bruce and I actually met through those conversations, and I remember this diagram back from when it was a scratch paper drawing, Bruce. I mean, it wasn't that long ago.
No,
So,
and you're true. I held up a drawing for Dr. Brown, and I'm going, look, and she was very polite to me, which drove me to actually create this diagram for us, and now it's this thing that we share back and forth.
yeah, and so we're going to kind of walk through the different pieces of that and share both best practices as well as FastBridge, the ways that FastBridge can help with supporting students with disabilities. So an important part of that, and at the very top of that diagram, was IEP meetings, which an important part of that is also goal setting. So let's dig into that a little bit. I find with this, it always helps to ground ourselves in the definition of special education. So special education is really specially designed instruction that's designed to meet the unique needs that a student has because of a disability. And the IEP then is the vehicle that we can use to tailor our instruction and those related services that are necessary to the unique needs of an individual student. So when we think about that and we think about how FastBridge can help support schools as they're really looking to take on that very big charge, FastBridge supports educators to more efficiently develop meaningful IEPs. So many teachers use screening data from FastBridge to document students' present levels, as Bruce was mentioning. Some people call that the PLEP or the PLAF. It can also be used to support goal setting and progress monitoring by providing one place where K-12 teachers have one tool that they can use to monitor reading, math, and social emotional goals. Bruce highlighted that teachers can just go in his case through DNA and get to FastBridge, but the fact that teachers aren't having to create different assessments for each of their students and each need makes it a lot more efficient when they're thinking about writing an IEP and to be meaningful and helpful. And then when teachers are collecting ongoing progress monitoring data, FastBridge allows them to work with a child to work with any educator to look at a child's data, even if they didn't collect the data. And so within FastBridge, every teacher that works with a student can view the data, which is really important because as we think about special education, those are additional supplemental services that are provided to a student. All students who receive special education services are also general education students, and so they need to be, all teachers need to be working together to really understand what's the overall effect of a student's whole instructional package. And FastBridge allows every teacher to be able to see those data, regardless of if they're the ones collecting it or not. And then the progress monitoring report automatically graphs progress monitoring data to help make data review meetings more efficient also and helpful. So a big piece of the IEP meeting is goal setting. It's arguably one of the most important parts of an IEP meeting. So let's review federal guidance related to goals. So sometimes as educators, we can forget that the goal of those extra services that we provide and the extra resources that come for students with disabilities is really to close the achievement gap for these students. So unfortunately, when students are labeled as needing these services, sometimes they experience a drop in the expectations that we have for them and the expectations about what they're capable of learning. And we all know that we rise to the expectations that are set for us, right? And too many of our students with disabilities don't experience high expectations. But it's very clear that special education law is intended to maintain high standards and that services are really expected to help students meet those high standards. So you'll see here that IEP goals are really intended to help students be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum. And our federal guidance also requires that we report on progress toward these goals and collect regular data on these goals. And so the other part of Bruce's diagram shows the regular data collection and reporting on each of those goals, which is the really powerful part of having special education services. And so finally, IEPs and their goals must be reasonably calculated to enable the child to receive educational benefits. So we need to be planning for students to be successful, to learn, and to grow. And so there are a couple different cases in special education case law, and this is the kind of stuff that Bruce and I can really appreciate and spend time really exploring, and many people may not be quite as passionate about. But there have been cases where students have had very similar goals, or really goals that aren't pushing them to learn new things every year, and that's come back. And what we see from legislative from guidance based on legislation is really that we need to be creating IEPs. We need to be setting goals that are reasonably calculated to enable the child to benefit from education. So that's a little bit about goal setting from a federal perspective. And now let's discuss more practical best practices for goal setting. So first, we want to always write SMART goals, right? So they need to be, our goals need to be specific, measurable, ambitious for students, relevant to students' needs, right? So what's impacting them right now, which is part of what that PLAF or present level section is getting at. And then time bound. So we need to know when we'll be able to achieve those goals by. Second, we want to choose measures that are great indicators of overall skill development. So when possible, we want to use more of those general type measures, and this allows us to see the generalization that students are making from that overall instructional package that they're getting. With our students with disabilities, oftentimes they're getting reading or math instruction a couple times a day, right, in different places. So they might either likely in the general education setting for a portion of that instruction, and then potentially also receiving some specially designed instruction as part of special education instruction. And so we want to see how that whole instructional package is working together. And then last, goal targets really matter. You'll see this when you look at a graph, but I can set a low goal and have low expectations for a student, and if they meet it, we'll celebrate that, right? So if I have a graph and we set a low goal and a student meets it, we're gonna think that we had big success, when really we may not have given the student more access to the general education curriculum like our goals are. It's really better to slightly miss a really ambitious goal than to meet a low goal, right? So we wanna make sure that our goals are set so the students are closing the gap with them. So let's dig into this a little bit further. When we think about possible measures that you can use to monitor overall reading growth, FastBridge has several options that monitor across the content area. So for most grade levels, we recommend a reading fluency measure because it's a really great measure that's very sensitive to small changes in students' skills. And it measures really well how that instructional package is generalizing to reading skills. A fun fact about CBM reading is that it's the best predictor we have of reading comprehension skills in education today. So even though it doesn't directly measure comprehension, it predicts overall comprehension skills better than direct measures of comprehension, which is absolutely, it's hard to wrap your head around, but it's absolutely true because it's so efficient and can be done in a minute. It's a really great measure. It's a little bit off topic, I know here, but we're talking about, how we get the best bang for our buck and how we can monitor students' progress with that instructional package that we're providing. And so CBM reading is one that we recommend at many grade levels. When we look at early reading skills, we have several different ways FastBridge to support early reading, and that is, there's something very dangerous going on outside my house right now. We can wait just one moment. Bruce, I wonder if you want to speak to the measures, the reading measures that your staff are currently using and finding helpful in progress monitoring within FastBridge.
So as Dr. Brown was talking about, what they're doing now on the special ed level, they're going in and they're actually able to use the assessment to drill down to locating the gaps. And as I'll share later on, we have specific strategies or techniques that we're using to address those gaps.
That's helpful. So When you look at early reading too, so we have progress monitoring and reading, and then one of the measures is early reading, and you can see here that it allows you to really monitor progress on beginning reading skills across the big ideas of reading. And just like reading, we have recommended measures in mathematics as well that support students with a variety of different needs. And so we have more general outcome measures as well as some specific measures, particularly in the area of early math, that allow us to drill into very specific, important early math developmental skills. And then last, in the area of social emotional skills, we have the direct behavior ratings assessment. And these are really valid progress monitoring measures that are a combination between a rating scale and an observation. So I was actually using these as a standard for IEP progress monitoring of behavior before I was a FastBridge user. It's what, as a special education director, I had trained all of our service providers on, and we had worked through. It can be used with a variety of different behaviors, but it's a very valid way to monitor progress around social emotional needs. And they're incredibly easy to use and much more useful in my personal experience than the point sheets and reflection sheets that we were using in my district prior to when we had access to the direct behavior ratings. So once you've chosen the measure that will best meet students' needs, or choosing to use the recommended ones within FastBridge, it's really time to set a goal. Remember from our best practices that goal targets really matter. And in many cases, without a standardized assessment, it's hard to know specifically how to set a goal and what to choose for a goal and what's reasonable goal growth in a year's worth of time. So sometimes it can be hard too to set individualized IEP goals. Sometimes we look and say, okay, in third grade, this is what we're going to set as the goal. So one of my favorite things about FastBridge is that it recommends individual goals using the student's baseline score, their start score, and growth norms. So it will actually suggest, and you can see from this photo here, that it will use an individual students where they're starting, and as well as growth norms within the system to select and suggest a realistic goal. And so that's where it's going to start. And then you can, as an educator, adjust either the goal itself or the growth rate to be either very realistic or more ambitious in most cases, to change the growth based on the package, the instructional package that we're using for a student. It also shows you as a comparison the spring benchmark for the measure you're using to allow you to consider, is this goal that we're setting going to close the achievement gap for the student, right? Are we getting pretty close or a lot closer to that goal than we would be getting if we didn't have a more realistic or ambitious growth rate? Is there anything else around goal setting that you found, Bruce, from your work either with FastBridge or before that you want to add about how your teachers are doing that?
I think that we're benefiting from the use of FastBridge because it's the data. We can set the goals through FastBridge. We can monitor it, where before it wasn't as concrete. It left a lot up to the case manager's thoughts of, okay, where are we? How can we move forward? And now it's really numeric in terms of tying it to the data, and then you can adjust it. And that's one of the benefits that my staff is seeing, is that, yeah, maybe we established this lofty goal, or maybe we were extremely conservative. We're doing pretty good. Let's bump it up. And I think that it's taken a lot of ambiguity out of the goal setting process for us.
That's great. So now that we have goals, the hardest part of goal setting and progress monitoring is really getting data collected, right? And getting them useful. And so goals aren't really meaningful if we aren't monitoring them. And so progress monitoring and reporting these data are really essential. So here are some progress monitoring best practices. When monitoring student progress, we first need to make a plan to collect data. Sometimes we're just kind of waiting and hoping that we'll collect the data. We set the goal and we're like, yep, so now we're going to collect data. but really without a schedule, and then I have that in here 3 times, a schedule and a schedule, without a plan for how we're going to collect those data, when we're going to collect them, who's going to collect them, it's hard to get regular data collected. And so, so having a schedule is really important. Also, along the same lines, scheduling data reviews is essential to making them happen. In schools, we've had PLCs or some sort of team meeting structure for a long time now. Over the last at least decade or so, I've noticed them being very common. And I don't see them as commonly used for special education teachers to be able to get together and have conversations about what we need to do, look at our data together and have conversations about how to intensify service when that's needed. And yet these are our students who are sometimes our trickiest learners, right? They're our toughest learners that we're working with. And so having time to review data and have conversations about what to do to improve and intensify services when needed is really essential. Teachers are not saving their best ideas for next year's students, right? They're trying everything they can to help students grow and learn. And so giving them that support through data review meetings is really critical. And then last, sharing the graphs. So sharing our graphs with educators and families is really important and can also be a powerful way to ensure that we're continuing to help students make the most progress possible. So let's dig into each of these a little bit further. So we have some different ways that we've seen teachers creatively manage to collect regular progress monitoring data, even though it's hard to sometimes fit in. And we know that regular progress monitoring has a really large effect size for improving student outcomes. So it's one of the things that we can do that really has an impact on student learning. We think because when we're using those data, when we're collecting data regularly, we see when students aren't making enough progress. And so we know when we need to intensify students' programming. And so to that end, there are lots of ways that teachers collect data that really maximize instructional time and fit it into a schedule. Some teachers will collect different subjects on different days of the week. So on Monday, I'll focus on monitoring math. Maybe on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, I'm monitoring reading. And so thinking about and scheduling based on different subjects of types of goals that students have. Others will schedule students on different days of the week. So if I have a small reading group of 4 to 5 students, I might schedule one each day to stay with me for a minute after the reading group or come a little bit early for the reading group, and they'll stay and I'll do that CBM reading assessment, which only takes a minute with that one student. And so Kristen always knows that she's staying after on Tuesdays, and we do a quick reading and she goes back to class. And finally, although it really isn't easy, I know I strongly recommend avoiding scheduling a progress monitoring day of the week. I used to do this myself. We would have Wednesdays were our progress monitoring day, and instead of instruction during especially designed instruction time, we would do progress monitoring. And we were lucky because we had good data and we were using those data to intensify services. And now looking back, I also realized that we weren't doing a huge service because students were missing out on 20% of their specially designed instruction or their extra instruction a week. And so they were missing out on 20% of extra intensive instruction that they could have been getting because we were monitoring progress. And so we don't want to do that. We want to try to find ways to schedule it, but maybe schedule students on different days of the week so that we can lose out on less instructional time. So those are a couple ideas, but I know that there are many ways that teachers have creatively found to schedule progress monitoring data collection to get it done and have the good data that they need to make good decisions. The goal is really to get it scheduled. And so next, I'll let Bruce dig into planning for the regular review of data.
Thank you. So what we've started in our district are called SEAMs. I have a coordinator, Jennifer, and we divide up our 12 schools. And so I have 6 schools that I work closely with. And every 4 to 6 weeks, Jennifer and I go in and we meet with our special ed teams. A few years ago, we were really working on process, our IEP practices and process. And I was in one meeting and one of the staff members from one of our schools, Sunny Slope Elementary, said, before we start, we just want to tell you we want 10 minutes of process and we want the balance of our meeting to talk about students. And that was one of the most wonderful things I heard is, okay, we got it, we got the process, we need to drill into students. And that's kind of the design of our SEAMS meetings, is that I can go in and I can meet with the special ed team from a school site. And the team includes our ed specialists or special ed teachers, our school psychologists, our speech therapists, the principal, and we can talk about students. And what we're able to do now is look at our FastBridge data and have the data guide our instruction. In our school district, we have interventions at kind of the tier 1, tier 2 level from FastBridge, those whole group and small group interventions that both general ed and special ed teachers are using. We also have our instructional aides who are being trained in these interventions, as well as other interventions, so that they're now able to work with our small groups and really provide quality instruction. What we found in the past was our poor teachers, they were inventing things. They were putting things together to address student need. And I just felt that that was just taxing on them and just wearing them out. So what we did is we went to targeted interventions. So we have, as I shared, the FastBridge interventions. We also, with math, we have do the math in reading at kind of a tier 2 level that our special ed staff has access to, is leveled literacy intervention, or core 5. And then more intense interventions, we've gone to Lindenwood Bell strategies within our district. We also have on Cloud 9 for math from Lindenwood Bell. So when we go in and we speak to our special ed teams, we're now able to use the data to dialogue on how our students are doing. Are their targeted interventions working? And as Dr. Brown talked about, closing that gap. Because throughout my career, I found that we understand that there's a gap for these students in specific areas, but what are we doing to really work on and close that gap? So that's what we've been moving towards. And now it's, we can have accurate progress monitoring that is not labor intensive. So I can remember the days, oh my gosh, I've got an IEP meeting coming up. I need to gather work samples, and and it was like that whole scramble. But now when we have our SEAMS meetings, we're as a team dialoguing on the impact of our strategies on each student. So we break down and we go through groups of students. The other nice piece too is our psychologists and speech therapists are in with the dialogue. So they're able to kind of present their view of how that student's disability impacts instruction. And so we can really drill down to accommodating or providing appropriate means for our students. And then also in our conversations, we're able to talk about the social emotional aspect. We've got our school psychologist right there who may be providing some targeted counseling interventions. So we're able to talk about, how's that student doing? Let's look at what Sabres is talking to us about in terms of the progress monitoring. So it's really that whole team concept. And then also the principal's there, or the principal and vice principal. So the administrators are there and they're hearing it. They're hearing that dialogue. So when they're doing their management by wandering, they're going into classrooms, they're able to see, wow, okay, that's that specific group. Oh, I see what that instructional aid is doing. So it really brings us together, and it's our attempt to really have ongoing kind of conversations, progress monitoring, and doing what's appropriate for our special ed students.
That's really powerful, Bruce. And these types of conversations are when I work with schools and I hear teachers say that progress monitoring is paperwork, or complain about, right, that it's all procedure. This is the type of thing this is the first question I ask is, do you have data review meetings where you get to have conversations and talk about how students are doing and what to do next? And every single time that I've heard that, there hasn't been this type of support and infrastructure to support educators, because again, they're not saving their best ideas for next year. They're really giving it all they have right now. And so we do need others to collaborate with and help us figure out what to do next, and dig into why some of these, why a student might not be making the progress that we expect. And so the other best practice around progress monitoring is really to share the graph. And so it's really important to graph data, first of all, as they're collected, because it's really impossible to know if a student's on track to meet a goal when comparing data without comparing data to a goal line. So I can know if a student if a student's scores are improving, right? But unless I know what the specific goal is or see a goal line, I really don't know if they're on track to meet a goal that's way out into the future. And so that's really where the power of progress monitoring and graphing comes in. So if we're graphing data as we collect them, which obviously is something FastBridge does for you, then you can see when a student isn't making adequate progress and make an instructional change. So we can intensify our instruction in time to change the learning trajectory for a student to help meet a goal. So at the beginning of my career, we used to hand graph data, and Bruce sort of mentioned this. It would be really awkward. I actually used to train people to do least squares regression by hand, which is really the last thing that anybody wants to be trained on or train. And so it would be really awkward though when you'd walk into an IEP meeting and see a graph where it was really painfully obvious that the data were graphed the day before, right? So the teacher would have kind of the stack of scores from the year and then be adding it the day before. And the first question that pops into everybody's head is, why didn't we change something earlier, right? It was very clear a long time ago the student wasn't making adequate progress. And that's one thing that having a program like FastBridge, a tool that can help you collect data and get it graphed efficiently, and then also combined with teams like the SEAMS team, have really changed that and shifted that conversation, because progress monitoring can be so much more than paperwork. And so here you see two examples of graphs from the FastBridge system. One on the left, you can see there was a big line, we call that a phase change often, where you can see the students' scores compared to that dotted goal line were definitely not on track. The trajectory was not in the right direction. The student was growing a little bit, but it wasn't enough to meet the goal. And so in that case, they made an instructional change, and then you can see the trajectory is getting closer and that gap is decreasing, which is great to see. So that instructional intensification is effective. The one on the right, you can see that the student scores kind of go up and down, right? They bounce, which unfortunately somebody forgot to tell students that they're supposed to grow at a linear rate. And so their scores bounce a little bit, right? And so this one, not only do you see the trend of the current data with that solid line, but within FastBridge, you'll also get a dotted line that projects out into the future. It's called our fast projection line. It's actually based on Bayesian statistics, but that line with just 6 data points can project out into the future and show you what a student's scores will be, what the student's trajectory is likely to be. So you can see in this case, even though there are actually maybe the majority of these individual scores are at or above the goal line, the students isn't moving in a trajectory or isn't performing in a way that we would think that they're going to meet their goal at the end of the year. So we can still make a phase change here and get a student back on track. And so having that projection out into the future is really helpful. And again, with FastBridge, the projection isn't based just on your past data like it is with least squares regression, but it is using Bayesian statistics and Bayesian modeling, where we're using a lot of data from many students who have similar profiles to project out into the future. And so those are the 3 ways of progress monitoring and reporting to be thinking about, some best practices and ways that might be supportive to you. So as we close, I want to review this process that Bruce showed us one more time. Special education can many times be it can feel procedural in nature, and it is procedural in nature in many ways. But the goal of all of the procedure and of special education law and all of the legal best practices and lawsuits that we have findings out of is really to help learners be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum. And that's a noble effort. And so for all of you who are here who are special educators, first I want to thank you for engaging in a really, really challenging field. But the mission itself is really powerful. And in my experience, the way we do all of this, help enable children to be involved and make progress within the general education curriculum, is through having the right tools and a really strong infrastructure to support educators, really to be able to implement really great instruction for students who need it the most. And so with that, I'm going to see if Bruce has any final things you want to add.
No,
and then we can take, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just you know, one last thing is that you know, on the negative side of our craft is at times we get involved in due process, and I would love to one time have our graphs from FastBridge and then have Dr. Brown explain to a parent's attorney the statistical nature of how things are derived, and that because with using FastBridge and the progress monitoring and the data, we become more defensible in our efforts to provide FAPE for the student.
Yeah, I agree. So I want to thank everyone again for your time, for all that you're doing this year to support students and their learning. And I think we're ready for questions. If we have some questions, Kristen.
We do, thank you. So the first one is, has SABRS had validation study in peer-reviewed scientific journal research?
The short answer is heck yes, but the longer answer, so yes, on our website, and we can maybe find that and put that in the chat as well. We have a list of SABRS references. And just to let you know, anecdotally, I'm a school psychologist by training. I every year continue to attend the National School Psychology Conference, and every year for the past 5 to 7 probably, people who are trying to develop new social emotional screening tools use SABRS as the benchmark comparison for their content validity. So it is widely recognized as a very strong screening measure in the area of social emotional skills. And I'm going to try to quickly wrangle some references for you as well.
Perfect, thank you. We'll get to those references and be sure we have about 6 minutes, so hopefully we can get them to attendees. Next question is, can you use FastBridge to identify gifted and talented students?
Great question, Bruce. I'm just jumping in, but feel free to add any perspective too. So we do have schools who absolutely use their FastBridge data, screening data, as a way to screen for students who are advanced learners and who are appropriate for gifted and talented programming. We have both national norms, and you can use both national norms and local norms to determine students who are at like the 95th or 98th percentile and above. You can also use our benchmarks, and for most of our measures, we have not only a low risk benchmark, but an advanced benchmark that you can also use in order to help with those decisions. As with any high stakes decision such as that, we would never recommend using just one measure, but it is absolutely valid and reliable for a screening tool in that case.
Perfect, thank you. And Bruce, do you have anything to add?
Yes, that's a next frontier for us because we have struggled with a consistent assessment tool for gifted and talented in our district. So we're kind of getting through this whole section, and then, okay, this is the bonus side for us for FastBridge that we can start to implement.
Perfect, thanks for sharing. Next question, when teachers are progress monitoring and they finish a cycle, should they rescreen, or how do they determine if it's time to switch to a new intervention plan?
Great question. Can you repeat the first sentence of it? I got a little confused.
Yes. So when teachers are progress monitoring and they finish a cycle, should they rescreen, or how do they determine if it's time to switch to a new intervention plan?
Okay, so I think that the word cycle is what's getting me a little thrown off. I'm guessing that you mean some like an intervention cycle or a quarter or something like that. So typically we would recommend setting goals for the entire school year, or the entire goal period if you're thinking about an IEP. So for that whole IEP year, what it does then is when you're using growth rate, so you're using kind of a rate over time, and that allows you to, whenever you collect data, to be able to compare the student's current score compared to where they should be now given the final goal. So we would recommend not thinking about setting a goal for a 6-week period or a 12-week period, but really thinking out to the end of the year or the end of the IEP cycle. And so that would be my first answer. Within FastBridge, again, from that goal setting slide, you can go back to that and see, we recommend, based on a realistic growth rate, a goal for you based on whatever date you pick as the end date, and a realistic growth rate working toward that date. So you have a couple choices. I would recommend, again, monitoring out longer, but most schools would collect screening data about 3 times a year, at least in reading and math. And so you would still be collecting those screening data at the naturally occurring times within your system while you're progress monitoring. So students in Bruce's district with IEP goals in the area of reading are also participating in universal screening and reading at the same time.
Perfect, thank you. And the individual said the cycle was 6 to 10 weeks.
Oh, okay. Yep. So I would typically recommend that's kind of probably your intervention cycle. And so I would recommend still setting the goal out to the end of the year and collecting data during that cycle, obviously meeting to review those data and decide if you need to intensify, but you don't have to then reset a goal. Bruce, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and so what we've benefited from is the close work that we've had with Dr. Brown of setting that long-term goal. But within our SEAMS meetings, that's our cycle to where we're looking at the data, and as a group, we're deciding, do we need to adjust the strategy, the intervention with that student? So that's for ours are like 4 to 6 week cycles, but we have that long-term goal for our student.
Perfect, thanks. Next one is, how do you align the data with curriculum and instruction?
Great question. So when we think about progress monitoring data in part, before you decide the goal that you're setting, or when you're setting a goal during the IEP process, during that IEP meeting, you're deciding what are the specific skills using all the information that you have. So FastBridge screening will give you a report that indicates, here's the recommendation for an instructional plan, here are the skills, here's the percentage of your instructional time that you should be working on different big ideas within reading or math. And it will even suggest some FastBridge interventions, as Bruce kind of mentioned, that they use at tier 1 and tier 2 in their district. And so you'll get recommendations. And so we develop a program that we think has a high likelihood to work, right? And then we use progress monitoring data to tell us if it is working. And so in meetings like the SEAMS meeting, when we're reviewing data and see that a student necessarily isn't making adequate progress, there's a couple things that we can look at. So first, on the progress monitoring report within FastBridge, you can see error analysis. And so you can see the specific error patterns that students are making and make decisions about if that's helpful for identifying where to intensify instruction. I would also recommend looking at your program checkouts. So in the vast majority of curricula, you have regular check-ins where students are being assessed on mastery of the skills that they've been teaching within that program. And so you can look to see, okay, is this student been falling a little bit behind on some of these? Are there specific skills from here I can tell that they might need to work on? And so those are a couple ways. I would also look at evidence-based routines and practices. And so adding in things, you can intensify by adding in strategies like distributed practice or practice in little times throughout a day, or other ways. Think about other ways to just really intensify. If you're pretty sure you're hitting the right skills, intensify the actual instruction the student is getting. Bruce, is there anything you'd add?
No, I think you captured that.
All right, and I know we're out of time, but there is one more question, really more focused to this process that Bruce has identified. So they're thinking about using SABRES and adopting this model. Would you recommend 3 times a year, use such as like beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year assessments? And the next part of the question is, how often does Bruce's team meet? Is it monthly, like an MTSS committee, or in addition to an MTSS process or meeting?
So we're using 3 times a year for SABRES right now, only because just our situation. We've been in distance learning. March 13th will be a year, and our school board has keeping us out in distance learning for the balance of the school year. So when we go back, we will probably do more progress monitoring in regards to Sabres. With our meetings, it typically is where things fit in our schedule. We try to do either 4 or 6 weeks that we go out and we meet with those special ed teams. I also, along with my coordinator, Jennifer, we meet with our what we call student study team chairs from each school site, a minimum of once a quarter, and we go over our practices, our assessment practices, what interventions we're using. We look at troubleshooting, and then if we need to, our SST chairs have access to us, at any time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, that concludes this session. I want to especially thank Dr. Sarah Brown and Bruce Cochran for your time and presentation. To all of our attendees, we look forward to seeing you in other sessions throughout today and the rest of the series. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.